Okay, I want to go ahead and call the legislative post-audit meeting Wednesday, March 2nd to order. Just want to remind everybody we're live streaming starting at noon. Remind everybody to turn on and use their microphones. Just also want to thank Kimberly and Josh Swati for providing the food today. Let's go ahead and start off with our first performance audit, K-12. Heidi, go ahead.
Good afternoon. This audit is a limited scope audit looking at the need for developmental education courses. It is a one-question audit, starts on page 1. What do stakeholders say about why developmental courses in college are necessary? The short answer to that question is that stakeholders reported many reasons that students might need developmental education courses, including having been out of school for an extended period of time, a lack of parental support, and inappropriate coursework in high school. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the background and a little information about what developmental courses are, and then I'll provide a more detailed answer to the audit question. But the background starts on page 2. Technical colleges, community colleges, and universities offer developmental education courses because some college students are unprepared in the core areas of math, reading, and writing to succeed in college. Most colleges and universities offer math and writing developmental courses, but a few offer reading courses. And these courses typically cover material that is covered in high school. Community colleges and technical colleges identify students who need these courses a little differently than how universities identify them. Community colleges and technical colleges typically administer a standardized placement test called the AccuPlacer, and that determines whether or not students will need a developmental course. Board of Regents staff also told us that some colleges consider things like high school coursework, high school GPA, SATs, and ACT scores as well when trying to determine which students could benefit from these courses. However, universities typically do not administer the AccuPlacer. Generally, they only look at measures like high school GPA and SAT and ACT scores. Students are charged tuition for these developmental courses, but they do not earn college credit towards their degree. Board of Regents officials reported that about half of Kansas post-secondary institutions offer another kind of course called a co-requisite course in math and English. And they offer these courses with, or in some cases, instead of traditional developmental education courses. These courses also serve students who are not prepared for regular college-level work. Co-requisite courses place students directly into college-level courses, but then also provide some additional classroom supports. The course covers both remedial material and the regular college-level work. So for example, a co-requisite math course may meet for 5 hours instead of the traditional 3. And in those extra hours, the teacher may provide some remedial instruction and also pace the course more slowly. So unlike traditional developmental courses, though, co-requisite courses allow students to earn college credit towards their degree. Colleges and universities identify students for co-requisite classes in the same way that they identify them for traditional developmental education courses. For the remainder of this presentation, I'm going to refer to both traditional developmental courses and co-requisite courses, both just simply as developmental education courses. We also looked at the number of students who took developmental courses. In the 2020 school year, a little more than 11,000 Kansas high school graduates were enrolled in at least one developmental course. However, that number is likely a little understated. That's because older students who may have graduated more than 15 years ago may not have been included in that count, as well as several colleges and universities that offer co-requisite courses do not report them as developmental courses. So that number is likely a little understated. But figure 1, which is on page 4, shows more detailed information about the students who took a developmental course in 2020. As you can see, that students age 17 to 19 represent the largest group of students who enrolled in at least one developmental course. 41% of the students were aged 17 to 19. Additionally, 34% were aged 20 to 24, while the remaining 25% were 25 or older. So now I'm going to get into the details of the audit question and provide a little more detailed answer. So to answer the question, we sent out 2 surveys. The first survey went to about 340 post-secondary developmental education instructors. About 144 of them responded. So it's a response rate of 42%. We think, given that response rate, that the results of the survey are reasonably representative. So we asked instructors to report how significant several factors are and the students' need to take a developmental course in college. So figure 2, which is on page 5, shows how respondents reported the significance of each factor. As you can see in the figure, 63% reported that the length of time a student has been out of high school is a significant factor. Additionally, 49% reported that not being a native English speaker is a significant factor in the need for developmental courses. Instructors also reported some additional opinions about the need for developmental courses. Other reported reasons included a poor home life or a lack of maturity in high school. Many also told us that developmental education courses are necessary to maintain broad access to college. The second survey that we sent went to almost 12,000 high school teachers, principals, and guidance counselors. About 1,500 of them responded, for a response rate of only 14%. Because of that very low response rate, the results may not be representative of the larger group. We asked staff to provide their opinions on the reasons recent high school graduates are sometimes unprepared for college. And figure 3, which is on the bottom of page 6, shows those survey results. As you can see in the figure, 69% of respondents reported that a lack of educational support at home is a significant factor in students not being prepared for college. A similar percentage also reported that students receiving passing grades in high school without mastering course content was also a significant factor. High school staff reported some additional opinions on the reasons students are sometimes not prepared for college. Many respondents told us that academic expectations were too low in high school. One teacher wrote to us that it's not hard to pass with a 60%, but that does not make a student college ready. Many also noted that students are struggling with basic skills once they reach high school. We also spoke with several post-secondary and K-12 stakeholders about their opinions on why developmental courses are necessary. Every person that we spoke to told us that a lack of appropriate high school coursework is an important contributor to the need for developmental education courses in college. So more specifically, though, many of them noted that students do not take enough math courses in high school. And some also noted that students sometimes change their minds about their post-high school plans, and that can result in students deciding too late to take the courses they need to be prepared for college. A few stakeholders also mentioned some other things. Some noted that students who have been out of high school for an extended period of time were more likely to need a developmental course. Additionally, a few thought that lowering college admission standards may also contribute. They reported that students may no longer feel the need to be prepared for college because they're likely to be admitted regardless. Last, as part of our survey and our interviews with stakeholders, we asked about actions that could improve college readiness and reduce the need for developmental courses. Figure 4, which is on page 9, shows how significant of an impact survey respondents rated various actions. So 73% of high school staff thought that requiring skills mastery before passing students would have a significant impact on improving college readiness. 69% of post-secondary respondents reported that providing additional educational supports in the high school classroom would have a significant impact. Also, a little more than half of high school staff thought that that would have a significant impact as well. Nearly all of the stakeholders we talked with thought that more communication with students about what courses they should take in high school would also be very helpful. We didn't make any recommendations out of this audit, so that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Okay, questions? Representative Williams?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Heidi, am I to understand on page 4 where it says age group 17 to 19 that 41% of 17-year-olds through 19-year-olds are taking some developmental course?
No, what that indicates is that of all the students enrolled in a college or university in 2020 and taking a remedial course, taking some sort of developmental course, 41% of those were 17 to 19.
Okay, so then that takes me to page 2, where it says the colleges provide a standardized math and English test called the AccuPlacer. Do we have data, or do they provide data to you on what percentage of students that take this test are not adequately prepared?
We don't have that data. We didn't collect that data for this audit. I don't know if the Board of Regents has that or if that is sitting at the individual institution level, but we did not evaluate it for this audit.
Okay, and then just the last, quick question. How many graduates do we have, Kansas graduates, a year? It says that we have 11,000 taking remedial courses, is that right?
So of all the students taking a developmental course, there were 11,000 of them were Kansas high school graduates. So there's more students taking developmental courses, but they did not graduate from a Kansas high school.
Okay, so K-Board could probably give us that number. And then just the last comment, if I may.
Go ahead.
Thank you, is that we're looking at some systemic problems here, because if high school teachers are saying 65%, and I understand there was a low return rate, but if 65% are saying the students receive passing grades without mastering the content, and we have seen that even through COVID, that graduation rates have continued to climb upward, but state assessment has continued, and NAEP and ACT has continued to spiral downward. And then you see the comments from the college instructors who are also saying high school course content is not adequate. There is a disconnect, and my concern here as a local taxpayer for a community college, as well as all of us are state taxpayers, is that we're paying twice for these remedial courses, and whether or not they take them together at the same time and it's co-requisite, or they take them at different times, we are paying twice. And so that's my frustration. Thank you.
Senator Thompson?
Thank you. And this just kind of dovetails onto Representative Williams' comments there. And looking at page 9, that on a couple of those graphs there, requires skill mastery before passing a student. 73% thought that'd be a significant impact, but down at the bottom, only 21% thought it'd be good to require students to take additional high school courses to graduate. Was there any response from like guidance counselors or schools about basically not letting these students skip out on some of the math and science courses that might be a little more challenging to them? Was there any kind of indication in that? Because again, it goes to the fact that we are paying twice. They don't take the courses when they're offered the first time, but then they see the need for it when they mature a little bit. Maybe we need to be giving them a little more guidance, and I don't know if there was anything in there with regard to that.
Certainly from the stakeholders, we heard a very, very consistent response from them, which is students often don't know what courses to take in high school. And so students are allowed to take whatever track they want to take in high school. So a student who maybe looks like they could be college material and would do well in college, if they don't want to take those courses, they don't have to. And so students have choice here. But certainly there's at least a belief among the stakeholders we talk to is that they don't understand. They don't know what courses they take. They don't know how to connect their post-high school plans to their high school plans. And that more guidance counseling or more conversations with them would be very beneficial in helping them to understand why you need to take this course now in high school, even though you don't seem to care. it matters later on, and we want you to take that course. So we certainly heard that from the stakeholders quite substantially, that that was important, and it was something that was lacking. In terms of from kind of the teachers and the information we got from the survey, from there was a lot of discussion about students are being passed without mastering the skills. That one teacher who said, you can pass with a 60%. You get credit for the class at 60%. That doesn't make you college ready. There were a number of teachers and other high school staff who said high school graduation rates are the most important thing, and they're being encouraged to pass kids along to make sure that graduation rate stays high, even when students are not mastering the skills, and that they do feel pressure to do that. And so we did see those comments, and saw quite a few, actually, of those sorts of comments about what's happening at the high school level and why some of those students are not prepared when they walk out the door.
Just one quick follow-up, if I may. What is considered a mastery level? 80%?
I don't
Mastery
know.
of a core subject.
I imagine that probably kind of would vary from teacher to teacher and even from school to school. I know that passing typically is 60%. That's usually a D minus is, and you pass the course and you get credit, high school credit, when you pass the course, and you may pass the course with a D minus at 60%. That doesn't necessarily mean you have absorbed the material.
See, it seems to me that though, from these respondents, that the mastery is the important part, and that maybe we should be raising our standards coming out of high school to make sure that we don't have to have all of this additional stuff. Just a comment. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Other questions, comments? Not seeing any. Thank you, Heidi. We have officials from the Kansas Board of Regents here are available for questions. Senator, or Representative Williams, that'll happen.
I do that all the time. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I would like to ask a question for KBOR. I don't know if Blake wants to. That'd be awesome. Okay, so we have 11,000 Kansas high school graduates that are enrolled in at least one remedial class. How many graduates would you say on average do our Kansas colleges have of Kansas students? So I guess I'm trying to figure out what percentage of our high school graduates are taking at least one remedial class.
So thank you. Blake Flanders with Kansas Board of Regents. I think if I did the math into the public institutions, we've had our college going rate is actually dropping significantly. I believe about 7 or 8 years ago, we were about at 55% in the publics. Now we're about 44.8%. I know there's individuals here from the Kansas State Department of Ed, but I believe there's about 34,500 seniors. So then you could just kind of back into the remediation numbers. We generally, just in terms of how to gauge whether or not someone's college ready, it's best to use multiple measures. So it's best to say, okay, how did you score on the ACT? What were your high school grades? Because that indicates some effort and some maturity to find out if you're college ready. But if you just look at the ACT, and I'm not saying it's a perfect measure, generally, they would deem you college ready when you have a 50% chance of getting a B and a 75% chance of getting a C in a course. So that's their benchmark of when you'd be college ready. If you look at 4 measures, we were at about 32% were college ready on all 4, and we have been slipping, so we're now at about 23%, which is what ACT would say are college ready as they graduate. Now, what we're really seeing is maybe not an increase as much in developmental education courses, but the troubling thing for us, and we're doing some focus groups around this to find out what's going on, is the students just aren't going to any post-secondary. So I would have a belief that every student should be prepared for some post-secondary experience, not necessarily a university 4-year degree, might be a welding certificate, might be a short-term IT certificate, or might be in associate degrees. But the facts are that I think in terms of wages, so we can look at the short-term cost. If we say, well, we're spending about $10 million, that's the real short-term cost. The longer-term costs are the ones that are significant. Someone that has a high school diploma earns a little over $26,000, and someone that has a baccalaureate degree earns about twice that, or almost $52,000. So if you look at the long-term career projections, your cost is not near as extensive on the front end to your concern, which is still significant. Really, the costs are on the back end when you look at an entire career and that trajectory.
If I may, one more thing. So on that, using your numbers of 34,500 seniors, 44%, or maybe you said 41.
I don't know if
I'm just
that
estimating.
number is
Yeah, you're
exact.
good, you're good. If we use the estimates that you provided, we're talking about 72% of high school students that are going on and taking a remedial course, if those estimates are somewhat correct. I would note to this committee that I just looked at the numbers yesterday. For math alone in the state of Kansas right now, 71% of all students are not proficient in math. So if you take 1, 2, 3, 4 categories and you split them, 71% fall on the not proficient. And that matches with the number that you're saying, even though that doesn't factor in those that are taking ELA, and I know there are other variables for this. It's just really concerning. I guess the best answer to this question is not necessarily, I understand the co-requisite, and I understand why you would put in your letter that we should have co-requisite classes, but the reality is we need to help kids sooner. They need to have their skills sooner, and they need to master their skills sooner. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Further questions? Not seeing any. Thank you. We'll move on to the IRBs. Kristen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm here today to present the Economic Development Incentive Evaluation Report that you have in front of you, which looks at the Industrial Revenue Bond Property Tax Exemption, which is also called IRBX, and is how I'll reference that kind of throughout my presentation today. I would mention that Andy, Daria, and Sam worked on this audit. Andy would have been here today to present to you all, but couldn't make it. So I'll do my best in his stead to cover the important points here. So jumping into just a little bit of information about how the incentive works, if you'll turn to page 3. Cities and counties issue industrial revenue bonds to help businesses finance things like, buying a building, building a building, expanding, renovating their space, those sorts of things. So the business uses the bond proceeds to do those things and then is responsible for repaying the bond. In addition to issuing a bond, state law allows cities and counties to grant a property tax exemption for nearly any IRB financed property. So that property tax exemption is called the IRBX. Cities and counties decide how much property to exempt and how long to exempt the property for. So they can exempt up to 100% of the property for up to 10 years. And then after 10 years, the business would pay the full property tax on the enhanced property. So now I'm going to jump a little bit, and if you're following along, if you want to turn to page 5 and figure 1. This is just to give you all an idea of where, like which counties have used IRBXs over about the last 15-year period, so going back to 2005. So as you can see, cities and counties have granted about 640 IRBXs during that time period. 63 counties had at least one IRBX. But more than half were granted by Johnson, Sedgwick, and Wyandotte counties. We estimate that those 640 IRBXs over that 15-year period have reduced property tax revenues statewide by just over about $1 billion or $100 million a year. So that's kind of some basic background information on how the incentive works. Now I'm going to turn to talking about the analysis that we did. But before I jump into that, I wanted to try to make clear what we did and why we did it, since I think that's been some confusion maybe along the way as we've done these economic development incentive evaluations. So in this particular evaluation, our main objective was to estimate the fiscal and economic impacts of IRBX. And we chose to estimate the return on investment for a couple of reasons. So that kind of seems like something that you all are interested in knowing. Also, in the previous incentives that we've evaluated as part of this particular work, so that would include Angel Investor Tax Credit and the Star Bonds program, we started by looking at kind of those programs' outcomes and compared them to what the statutory goals were. In this particular instance, state law doesn't actually include any stated goals for the IRBX incentive. So it didn't really have like a measuring stick, if you will, to compare to. So we do think that return on investment, although it's not everything, that it is a good first step at understanding how the incentive works and beginning to understand what it does for Kansas. So that out of the way, I'm kind of moving on to page 6 here, which is where our analysis begins. We looked at 8 IRBXs, and we do kind of the big takeaway is that we estimate all 8 will generate positive returns overall. I'm going to unpack that for you. There's a fairly complex method that goes into this. I'll try to find the right balance between helping you all understand and not getting you too far into the weeds. But first I want to clarify kind of, again, a little bit of important information about kind of the analysis we did, the methods we used, the assumptions we made, that sort of thing. So just to be clear, one thing our analysis doesn't show is whether or not the IRBX program as a whole is good or bad, because we only looked at 8 IRBXs. It also doesn't show the total effects that a project or a business created. Instead, it shows how many effects an IRBX created. So I'll talk about that distinction a little bit more here in just a minute. But in terms of the method we used to evaluate those 8 IRBXs, we used a research-based simulation model that was created by Dr. Timothy Bartik from the Upjohn Institute for Employment Research. He's considered a leading expert on the impacts of economic development incentives. And we also consulted with the 3 professors from K-State and KU, who I believe are joining us online today as well. So they helped us understand the model, make sure that we were using it appropriately, helped us also kind of work through the results of that analysis and interpreting the analysis. So that model uses kind of several key inputs and then produces with those inputs, produces a couple of key outputs. So the 3 kind of main inputs include jobs, something that's called the but-for percentage, that form kind of the benefit side of the equation. And then on the cost side, we have the actual amount of the property tax exemption itself. So if you flip along with me to page 8, I'll talk a little bit more about kind of those first 2 inputs, which is jobs and the but-for percentage. So for the number of jobs that were created, we used pre-project estimates. So generally speaking, so when businesses submit their paperwork as part of this, they say how many jobs they expect to create. So that's what we've used as kind of the job number, and assume that those last for 30 years. So there's a key assumption. Then to that number, we apply what's called a but-for percentage. And that percentage is trying to estimate how many of the jobs the business estimated that they would create were created because of the IRBX incentive, and how many were created because of something else. So that could include like other factors that weigh into business decisions, can include things like infrastructure, the quality of the labor force, maybe the geographic location of the business itself, those sorts of things. So this percentage isn't something that we really know, that cities or counties really know. So the way that the model handles this is to estimate how many of those jobs it thinks is happening because of the incentive or because of those other factors. And it does that by comparing the value of the property tax exemption to the total value of the project. So the smaller the ratio, it's essentially saying the fewer jobs that were created because of the incentive, and the more jobs were created because of those other factors. So figure 2, which is on page 9, gives you a breakdown for the 8 IRBXs we looked at and how that but-for is playing out. So I'm just going to use General Motors as an example, and I'll keep using it kind of throughout each of the figures we talk about, just for consistency's sake. So if you're looking at figure 2, what that's showing is General Motors estimated, again, before the project actually happened, they estimated they would create 240 jobs. And then when we put that information into Dr. Bartik's model, it estimates that 11% of those 240 jobs, or 27 of those jobs, happened because of the incentive, and that 213 happened because of something else. So those two pieces of information together are kind of a key input on the benefit side. And then again, when it comes to the cost, there we use the actual property tax exempted for 6 of the 8 IRBXs we reviewed. So 2 of them are not completely finished yet, so we collected actuals where we could and then had to estimate like a few years to finish those out. So the model's taking all of those inputs and then estimating the effects that they create for the state and local economy through kind of 2 buckets, if you will, for lack of a better term. So I'm going to move you all backward a little bit, but if you'll turn to page 7, that's describing kind of the 2 buckets, the 2 main outputs from the model. So the first of those is private sector economic activity, which measures the economic effects that businesses generate when they create jobs. So that includes both direct and indirect jobs and the effects that the IRBX has on things like residents' income, real estate values, business profits, all of those things over 30 years. So the assumption is looking at a 30-year time horizon. So that's kind of the first bucket. Then the second bucket is all of that private sector economic activity also creates public sector tax revenues, so state and local tax revenues, through things like, of course, income, sales, and property tax. So you can add those 2 numbers together, the private sector economic activity and the public sector tax revenues, to get the overall return. We have presented them in this report separately, just so that you all have a better sense of where those effects are coming from, but certainly can add them together, which I'll walk you through an example of that as well. So now I'm going to jump back ahead and take you to page 10 and figure 3. So now that I've fed you a bunch of information about how the model's working, hopefully the numbers in this table make a little bit more sense. But this is looking at the first bucket that I just talked about, private sector economic activity. So when we looked at these 8 IRBXs, gathered that information, used Dr. Bartik's model, we found that 7 of the 8 IRBXs are estimated to return more than $1 in private sector economic activity per dollar exempted. There's one of the 8, which is Black and Veatch there at the bottom, that comes in a little bit under $1. So I'm going to, again, walk you through General Motors as an example of kind of how to interpret the numbers in this figure. So if you'll recall from figure 2, we said Dr. Bartik's model is estimating that General Motors, 27 jobs were attributable to the IRBX. Those 27 jobs are estimated to create just over $22 million in private sector economic activity over the course of 30 years. That compares to just over $4 million of property tax exempted. And then when you compare those two numbers, that's where you're getting the just over $5 figure that's shown in figure 3. So that's the first bucket. Then if you'll turn to figure 4 on page 11, that's showing the second bucket, which is public sector tax revenues. So here, the model is estimating that none of the 8 will generate enough state and local income tax revenue to cover the cost of the property tax exemption. So again, using General Motors as an example, those 27 jobs, the model's estimating would generate about $3.5 million in public sector tax revenue over 30 years, compared to the $4 million in property tax exemption gives you that 81 cents you're seeing in the right-hand column. So as mentioned, you can add those two amounts together. So for General Motors, if you take the $5.18 from figure 3 and add the 81 cents from figure 4, you'll get a return of just under $6 per dollar exempted as an overall return. If you do that for all 8 of the IRBXs that we reviewed, all 8 of them generate a return that's greater than $1, which includes Black and Veatch, as we pointed out in that other figure. So that is a lot of information. There are several appendices. B, C, and E all have more information on things like the method that we used, the estimated effects by income, and then more details about each of the 8 IRBXs that we reviewed. We did also do kind of a literature review, looked at other states. That information is on the remaining pages of the report, so pages 13, 14, and 15. We do have a recommendation on page 15 that the legislature should consider amending statute to clarify the purpose, basically the goals of the IRBX program, that might include like specific benchmarks that you all would expect to see to know if the program is working as intended. I would also point out that we provided the draft report to to the local officials with each of the communities of the 8 IRBXs we reviewed. Their responses were optional because we didn't have any recommendations. 2 of them, Finney County and the city of Shawnee, did submit responses, so you can find those on pages 15 through, let me check, through page 28. And that wraps up my presentation. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, we'll move on to questions. Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a couple questions. Number one, when you reference that, you find it, cities and counties administer and oversee IRBs and IRBXs, but no one collects comprehensive data. 4 years ago, we passed the Economic Incentives Transparency Portal, and I don't think, did you check to see if they've updated IRBs yet? Last I had looked, it didn't look like they had. Had that been updated, we might have been able to get some significant information. Just wanted to know if you had checked that resource on Department of Commerce's website.
So we went to the Board of Tax Appeals and Department of Revenue, have some information on this, but the problem becomes if they're collecting pre-project estimates or if they're collecting what actually happened. And so for a lot of the actuals, we tried to go to the locals.
Okay, and just a note to the committee, that is over $50,000 for a program, so it should be updated. It's been 4 years for the Department of Commerce to update that portal. So you should be able to identify local businesses in your community that have had IRBs. My second question and last question is on page 9 and 10. So for the model, you used the but for the jobs created, and you outlined these jobs were probably not but for. And so basically 81% of the jobs did not qualify for the but for portion, meaning they probably would have been created anyway, correct?
If you're looking at the General Motors
I'm looking at the list that you
Example.
provided. There's 1,162 total estimated new jobs, but for percentage, and I added, oh, sorry, the new jobs attributed to the IRBX was 93. So that means that out of that, only 8% of the jobs, only 8%, sorry, not 81, only 8% of the jobs were attributed to but for, correct?
Sorry, I'm making sure I'm following along. Are you looking at figure 2?
On page 9, yes.
And then which company are you looking
I'm
at?
looking at, I'm actually just adding up the whole list.
Okay, I'm sorry, that's why I'm not
Yeah,
tracking.
no, I'm just adding up the whole list, and I just added up the number of jobs that were attributed to the IRBX divided by the number of total estimated jobs, and I came up with 8%. So my question is, did I get that part right?
So I would
That sample.
say it's probably not appropriate to add them across projects, just because it doesn't, the but-for is not being calculated that way. It's by individual business on its
Right.
own, but that's,
True, but what I'm trying to do is, if it's a sampling, then I was trying to get a general idea of what would the sample look like, and the general sample shows that there's a smaller percentage, you could say each project, well, some of them were 66%, I do see that, so it counters, it
Yeah.
averages out. But my question really is, on page 10, why wasn't the but-for applied to that model?
so it is.
It is applied?
So that but-for is kind of being applied to the jobs that are entered into the model. So then the model is, for, again, just using General Motors as an example, is saying 27 jobs are due to IRBX. How many effects do those 27 jobs create?
So those are the numbers that are included in here.
Correct.
The 22 million for General Motors is, correlates exactly with 27 jobs.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm assuming this is a static model, meaning they didn't, apply inflation or anything like that, correct?
It does adjust for, so the model is pretty complex, and it does account for a lot of different things like local unemployment rates. It talks about looking at kind of the industries that the business is in to figure out what the appropriate multipliers would be. So we did work with the consultants from K-State and KU to try to modify the model to make it appropriate for what we know to be true of the businesses we reviewed.
Gotcha. But it's, just so I'm clear on what this model is doing, because models, garbage in, garbage out. You can put good information in, what comes out the other end is, and I'm used to that. I dealt with it for 40 years. This deals, though, specifically with the impact on these individual businesses, but not, I guess what I'm saying is, it doesn't look to me like there was any consideration of how it impacted the community with regard to taking up the tax burden that is not, paid by these industries in there. Is that, I don't see it anywhere in the report.
Yeah, like when so figure 3 is looking at private sector economic activity, that is considering not just the direct jobs that are created. So again, I'm gonna go back to the General Motors example, but not just the 27 jobs that General Motors created due to IRBX, but then also what secondary effects did those jobs have? So counting for things like that increases the income of residents in the community, maybe that increases housing prices in the area, all of those sorts of things. And yes, it is a model that's estimating a lot of that stuff.
So on figure 3, where it says total reduced property taxes estimate over 10 years, that's the total reduced property taxes paid by General Motors and not by the community, or?
That's how much that General Motors would have paid in property tax, but did not because of IRBX.
IRBs are generally, their property tax goes back to pay the bonds.
Yeah.
And, I think the Kansas City or Missouri's are, I believe 20 years. Ours are 10. I think the real misjustice is let's see on year 15, how much property tax was gathered off that piece of property, or year 11, and then how much was gathered the 15 years before. You know, you get a piece of property that's paying a $500 or $1,000 a year, and then all of a sudden you abate for 10 years a piece of property, and they put a building on it that's $15 million, that's got $100,000 worth of property tax. Well, year 11, you're going to outweigh the prior if it was just vacant ground. So, I mean, I know people that have used the IRB. I know they've brought businesses from Texas and other place, built 150,000 square feet and created a couple hundred jobs in Kansas. I think it works fine, but I mean, that's for everybody else. It's,
That's why I'm asking the questions. I just want to be clear on what the model is telling me. That
well, and
was,
I think our neighboring state, one of the things we don't look at is Missouri's, I believe IRBs are 20-year. So, are you done, Senator Thomas?
thank you.
Senator Tyson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your presentation. On page 14, it states that a majority of states do not use this method for incentives. Did you look into that any further, other than the 16 states that do use it?
We just looked at the states who use it, and I would say, I mean, we're specifically looking at whether or not it's a property tax exemption that's tied to an industrial revenue bond. So that's what this, just to clarify, that's what the 16 states
Right,
are.
I understand that, but
Okay.
I'm questioning why the other states aren't using it, if it's such a great tool set.
We didn't follow up with those other states to ask.
Thank you.
Representative Probst, is that right?
That's right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is mostly just so I can make sure I'm understanding some things and have some clear information. On figure 3, and I'll stick with the General Motors example, when we're looking at the $5.18 in economic activity, that's overall. This is wages and tertiary spending and things like that, right? Of which a small, am I right in thinking that a small part of that would be additional tax revenue in terms of income tax or sales tax or anything? I'm trying to parse out how much actually comes back in tax revenue to compensate.
So the
cover the cost.
the tax revenue is what's in figure 4 on page 11.
And that includes all that, that's what we're talking about there, is that's all the tax activity that's a result
The
of that.
tax activity is in figure 4. All of the other economic activity is what you're seeing in figure 3.
Okay, and so then when you add those together, that's where you make the determination on whether you add that tax information with the economic information, and that's what tells you whether a dollar spent gets more than a dollar.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Correct.
Okay, further questions, comments? Only other comment I'd have to say, IRBs are exempt from sales tax, so when they're building a facility, the materials would be exempted from sales tax. And I'm sure there's a lot of other states that have tools that we don't have, and I'm guessing Oklahoma's got some pretty good tools. They're competing for Apex right now, but officials are available for questions from Department of Revenue, Finney County, the Unified Government. I don't see them here, but, or maybe some of them are here. And the 3 consultants, if you guys have questions. Not seeing any questions. We'll go ahead and move on to review of the audit proposal from 2020. Chris, you want to talk about tab A?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is in tab A. We just wanted to bring to your attention that we have an approved audit project that is getting pretty old and hasn't been yet started. It was a limited scope audit of the Department of Commerce requested by Senator Hensley and approved by this committee in November of 2020. We intended to have our economic development team kind of fold this into their work That didn't happen due to some unexpected challenges in that economic development work. So internally, we have a policy at post-audit to give the committee an opportunity to reconsider approval of a delayed audit before we commit staff time to doing it. So that's why I'm here for you today. It has been more than a year since the committee approved the audit. Senator Hensley is no longer in the legislature, so we are just bringing it back to you all to reconsider. If there's still interest in doing the audit, we certainly will do it. It's an approved topic. If the committee has lost interest, we would need you to take formal action to rescind it.
Okay, I just want to make one statement before I turn the floor to Representative Barker. I did talk to Secretary Tolan, and he's aware of this. He just says these audits take up so much time, he would prefer if we'd rescind it. But Representative Barker, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm of the same consideration. I would move that we remove it from our audit list. Next month, we'll be looking at all new audits. Secretary Tolan does not think that it's needed at this time, so that would be my motion, to rescind it and let it go away.
Do I have a second? Do I have a second? Second by Senator Corson. Questions or comments? Representative Williams.
Well, I will certainly support the motion, but I would say this is interesting question. And I have often asked myself when you're dealing with, let's say, star bonds or other things, how does some of these things get approved? And this question is, what's your process to manage conflict of interest? And I think human nature doesn't change. And I wouldn't say it's based on any particular party that is in charge of the Department of Commerce. And so you may be able to answer that question, but that is this question that Senator Hensley I actually agree it's a good question.
The audit was not about the current secretary. It is about the former Secretary Suave and how he ran the operation. I think there was a lot of concern. He's not there any longer. But, I mean, we have a choice. We can go and rehash, history, or, as Secretary of Commerce is doing a good job over there, let him focus on getting more businesses for the state. So.
Chairman, may I just comment?
Go ahead.
Well, and it didn't actually, and I understood that was the purpose because, that's kind of obvious, but it didn't specify him in here, and I do think I support your motion, but in the future, I think that's good information. Maybe Department of Commerce could just provide us that information and just say, here are our safeguards. We don't accept dinners, or we don't accept gifts, or what is their policy in terms of that? I don't know, and I think it's important. We have requirements as legislators that regarding food, gifts, those types of things. I don't know what policies they have. And so I'm not talking about specifics, just generality.
Representative Barker, go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciate you supporting the motion, and I would join with you if we wanted to do a 100-hour audit just to get that criteria established, so we would all know that. If that's something you would choose to do. Thank you.
Okay. Representative I'm sorry, Senator Tyson. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a 100-hour audit. This is a 100-hour audit. While I appreciate the motion, Mr. Chairman, I will not be supporting it because I don't care who the Secretary of Commerce is. I feel like this is pertinent information, and I respect Senator Hensley for bringing this request.
Okay. Representative Topliger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Don't we have a law already that says that anybody that sits on one of these committees to, for example, with the Department of Commerce, and they are in looking at contracts, potential contracts, that they sign a statement that they disclose that they don't have any connections, or their family, their spouse doesn't have any connections with the proposed contract the proposed, who the proposed contract would go to? Don't we already do that under the law? No, I mean, because we did an audit, Mr. Chairman, that I asked for, but we looked at the counties, and the counties said they were abiding by by making sure that no one had a conflict of interest and were signing those. Okay.
I'm sure there's plenty of minutes on this from back in them meetings. The former Senator Hensley was acknowledging contracts that were signed by Secretary Suave. And, you know, I'm guessing if this audit takes place, some of the contracts we're going to be looking at, you know, I don't know. We've got a motion and a second on the table. What does the committee want to do? Are there any further questions or comments? Not seeing any. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Against, nay? Passes. Do you, okay, Senator Thompson, Senator Tyson wants to be recorded as nays? Okay, we'll go ahead and move on. Let me get back to the agenda.
Okay, now if you will turn to tab B. State law requires that we conduct an audit on virtual schools coming up this year. It is due January 15th of 2023. The audit requires that we look at other states' virtual schools and a number of different aspects listed there on page 1 of the memo. Because all of our work is directed by this committee, this is a statutory requirement, but we need committee approval of our proposal to begin work on this audit. I want to point out 2 things about the proposal. It's in your packet there. We have 2 objectives listed on the audit proposal. Objective 1 is pretty much just mirrors what's exactly required in state law. However, we, staff, added Objective 2 for your consideration because state law just has us evaluating programs in other states, the cost, resources needed, their scope, their effectiveness, but it stops there, and we thought it might be more helpful to you all if we then compared that to Kansas. So that's what Objective 2 is. So it's your call, but we are looking for the committee to either approve Objective 1 and or 2, or make any other changes you would like to this statutorily required audit.
Okay, do I have a motion? Representative Williams.
Sure, I would move that we go ahead and accept Objective 1 and 2 and authorize the virtual school audit.
Do I have a second? Representative Barker seconds. Questions or comments? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Against, nay? It passes. Okay, let's move on to the consent calendar items. Kristen? Tab C.
Yes, thank you. So consent calendar, we have 3 items on the consent calendar today. The first of those is approval of the minutes from the last meeting, which was February 16th. You can see those in attachment A. We do also have the acceptance of the performance audit and the economic development evaluation presented today. And then also approval of 2 limited scope audits. Just a reminder that unless there is an objection from the committee, all of the items on the consent calendar will be considered approved. Anyone who didn't attend the last meeting is welcome to abstain from the minutes.
Hang on a second. Let her finish. Are you?
Those sorts of things. I was going to give you an overview of the 2 limited scopes. If you want me to give you a quick walkthrough of what they are.
Got a question, or do you want?
Well, I have an objection before she passes it on.
Okay, go ahead.
The minutes inaccurate. I was online.
You are online?
Yes, I was.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, she was.
Okay. I did not realize that, so we will get those amended.
Okay, go ahead.
So the 2 limited scope audits, the first one, so if you'll turn to attachment B, you'll see the first of those two. This request would come from Senator Hildebrand and Representative Concanon jointly. And it would have us look at it's a source of federal funding, the Connectivity Emergency Response Grants for broadband funding. Include things like which projects received that money, where were they located, that type of information. The second limited scope audit proposal is from Representative Hoy, who is with us here today. And that would have us evaluate disbursements for the tax credit for low-income students scholarship program.
Okay.
If you have any questions, I'm welcome to answer any.
Any questions? Not seeing any? Thank you. Are there anybody that wants to abstain? Or is there any motions to object? Senator Tyson? We're going to correct the minutes, and it'll say that she was watching virtually.
Yes, correct.
Okay. Senator Williams, or Representative Williams, I'll get it here.
Hey, that's fun. All right. I just wanted to make a comment on this. I have no problem with this. I'm not going to object to it. But there is a West Urban Preparatory Academy in Wichita that actually does receive tax credits. And I just checked it yesterday. They took the state assessment for their first time, and they're majority minority students, and they were 16 points higher than the Wichita School District. So it is a great thing. I welcome the audit, but man, they're doing great in these schools.
Okay, that's great. Chris, thank you. Okay, Chris, you've got the floor on our next meeting date.
Okay, last item is in tab D. Just a quick recap. Thank you all for being here today. Our next meeting is March 30th. The audits being released at that meeting include foster care, economic impact statements, and an IT security audit on Parsons State Hospital. After that, the big meeting will be on Friday, note the date change, Friday, April 22nd, and that's when you all will pick audit topics for the upcoming year. And we probably will have some limited scopes ready to release at that point. Also, we have 2 on suspended driver's licenses, a follow-up audit, and 1 on the social workers being hired by K through 12 schools.
Questions? Are we good? Okay. Thank you, Chris. We are adjourned. Thank you.